Thank you, everyone, for coming, especially today on Women's Day. We have an exciting and informative group of speakers here today to talk to you about HJ 34. The Witch Exoneration Bill has nothing to do with witchcraft and everything to do with women's rights. Unfortunately, both Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz and Judiciary Chair Representative Staffstrom were unable to make it here today. Both of them support this bill, and Representative Staffstrom, co-chair of the Judiciary, has co-sponsored it and supports this bill. They wanted to express their strong support for this resolution. Many have co-sponsored this bill, and the Lieutenant Governor will actively be championing this piece of legislation. Our first speaker will be Senator Saoud Anwar, who's co-chair of Public Health, and he's also been my partner in putting this bill forward, although from a different perspective. With not much more, Senator Anwar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Garibay. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As legislators and people across our state and our country are commemorating the International Women's Day, it's important to recognize that the Women's Day that we are celebrating, our history for how we have treated women has not been very good. And one of the darkest chapter in the history of the state of Connecticut and in the country has been how women were treated in Connecticut, in Hartford in the 1600s. Before there was Salem, there was Hartford. Before there was Salem, there was Connecticut. About 32 years or so before Salem, women were murdered by the state. And they were murdered because they were demonized. And this was without any due process, without any reason except that there was an organized effort to go after women who were independent thinkers, the women who would stand up to authority. And if you look at what has happened and you read about what's our state and our country, this has happened, it is very painful. I am honored to stand with my friends, the community members, the family members, my legislator friends, to be able to say that it is never too late to be able to clear somebody's name. If somebody's done wrong and somebody's been wrongfully accused, we have to clear the name, and that is not a time-dependent issue, whether it is from yesterday, whether it's from today, or whether it's from hundreds of years ago. So we have to stand up and make sure that we clear the names and exonerate the individuals who were murdered by a state, and the unified voice say, we are sorry that this happened. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we're going to have Representative Mary Fortier, who will be reading a statement from the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and yes, these are the Lieutenant Governor's words. I'm happy to read them for us. The Connecticut witch trials are not a story of witchcraft. Rather, it's a story of something much more sinister. The deep-rooted misogyny that has plagued our country for centuries. For 15 years, Connecticut tried women and men for the crime of witchcraft, executing at least 11, 9 of whom were women. These women were victims to a society that punished them for speaking out, dressing differently, inheriting land, or just simply because somebody didn't like them. Men like Governors John Haynes and Thomas Wells and Deputy Governor John Mason, who served as magistrates for the first trials, gave validity to the accusations. They handed down guilty verdicts and death sentences based only on the words of neighbors. Community leaders like Reverends Thomas Hooker and Samuel Stone fed the flames of hysteria during their sermons, encouraging confessions and further accusations. Now, more than 300 years later, we can see the wrong that was done. And unfortunately, we still see the rights of women being attacked by men in power. In expressing remorse for the past, we must also use the stories of these women to propel us towards the work we need to accomplish today. Thank you to Representative Jane Garibay, Senator Saad Anwar, and the powerful coalition they've gathered to tell the stories of those who were wrongfully accused. It is time to give these women the justice they deserve.
Thank you, Representative. And now we're going to hear from my good friend, Representative Ann Hughes of the 135th District.
Thank you. I actually represent the district that at that time was Goody Knapp's homeland where she was executed. It's important to remember that we have inherited the legacy of these justice systems of state-sanctioned executions, like the representatives have said. And who was in power then? And who handed down these guilty verdicts and then executions? It is important to note that I am the granddaughter of a suffragette who marched on Washington in 1917, because she did not have the right to vote. I am her granddaughter who is a legislator now. And now we as policymakers must inform those justice systems that have normalized state-sanctioned violence against accused. And by a jury of peers. Who were the jury of peers at that time? These were men, all men, landowners. And we really have to look at how have we changed our justice system to truly represent justice and truly represent a system where everyone has aspired to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I see some of that ugliness in some of the fanned flames of wars against certain persecuted communities today. And I want to be sure that we stand firm as policymakers against that kind of persecution now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Kathy Ermes, historian with a PhD and a Juris Doctorate.
Thank you very much. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the legal history, which I think can be a bit confusing. One of the things about witchcraft, crimes of witchcraft, as they were charged in the 17th century, is that they were unlike other crimes. Like murder, for example. Murder is something that exists, and you have a victim that you can point to, and you have evidence that can be presented in court. But the people who were accused of witchcraft faced a much harder threshold than other people. They were often presented with delusional evidence, right? Spectral evidence, beliefs in the supernatural. They did not have a right to counsel. Defense counsel was essentially illegal in Connecticut until 1689. In the criminal courts. And even after it became legal, it was not customary to have it. Puritans didn't trust lawyers. They thought that lawyers would muddy the truth. And in many cases, I think we can see that, right? Where lawyers kind of confuse the issue by objecting and limiting testimony. But in a witchcraft delusion, in a panic situation, women were confronted with their neighbors in hysteria, giving testimony against them that often relied on magical or superstitious evidence, things that couldn't actually have been done. Women didn't consult with familiar spirits because there aren't familiar spirits, for example, and they didn't consort with the devil and go sign his book because you can't do that, physically speaking. No historians today believe that the people accused of witchcraft in Connecticut, or Massachusetts for that matter, were attempting to practice maleficium or sorcery. And they understand that the accusations came out of fears rather than out of practical, reasonable evidence against the people who were accused. Legal procedures in the colony were much like those in England, but there were some innovations, and often people didn't understand the procedures that were being used against them. And in particular, I refer to the Fairfield trials in 1692, when a special court of Oyer and Terminer was convened. that really did not follow any procedures consistent with Connecticut law before that time. The accused also had no right against self-incrimination, something we take for granted today, and so often they were pressed into coerced confessions. Before 1663, witchcraft cases were heard by a judge, and guilt was decided by all-male juries made up of propertied citizens who knew the accused and the accusers. And the predominant belief at the time was that women were especially susceptible to temptation by the devil, and that New England in particular was the battleground between God and Satan, because New England was trying to be a godly community. If we think about the women who were charged and the men who were charged, we realize that they were up against something they couldn't fight in any kind of reasonable and rational way. And so it's imperative upon us to exonerate them today. And I'll just mention that Massachusetts has also exonerated the accused witches from that state, and that if we think about another case, Homer Plessy, right, the plaintiff in Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the Supreme Court ruled that could be equal, right? Separate accommodations and could be equal accommodations and could be legal under the law. Plessy was just posthumously exonerated by the governor of Louisiana about a year ago. And I think it's important to remember that things that we're ashamed of in our past, we can confront and rectify in the present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And now we're going to hear from Sue Bailey, a descendant of the falsely accused Alice Young.
My name is Susan Bailey, and I live in Hartford. Alice Young of Windsor was the first accused witch executed in the English colonies. She was hanged in Hartford in 1647. Alice was my 9th great-grandmother. I'm requesting that HJ Resolution 34 be approved, which would exonerate Alice and the other persons accused as witches in Connecticut in the 1600s. I speak for myself, my family, and all the other families of accused witches when I implore the legislature to assuage the lingering sorrow over our relatives' terrifying nightmare of being accused and in some cases hanged. In the 3 centuries since the witchcraft hysteria, scholars have come to understand that the underlying causes for calling someone out as a witch had to do with reasons other than the supernatural, such as ignorance of the biological causes of illness, coveting the property of women without husbands or sons, singling out non-conforming or poor individuals, or wanting to be rid of a wife. My understanding is that witch trial records in general contain no solid evidence of actual witchcraft, except for confessions obtained under duress. In the case of Alice, there are no court documents to indicate the purported activities that led to her arrest, conviction, and execution. So, if we are able to accept the modern academic interpretation that the accused men and women were innocent, the Connecticut legislature should be more than willing to pass HJ Resolution 34. During the March 1st public hearing on the bill, some legislators asked for proof that the accused were innocent. That's ironic, considering that no proof was required to convict those accused. But what did it mean in the 1600s to be so accused? It was tantamount to being called a Satanist. The accused were assumed to have signed a pact with the devil to do his bidding. We must be clear that this has nothing to do with the practice of Wicca. It makes no sense that people raised in the Puritan Church, which consistently preached the need to live a Christian life to avoid the fires of hell, would willingly go to the dark side. I'm requesting that the fantasy and superstition of 300 years ago be set aside for logic and reason in an attempt to atone for the cataclysmic decisions made by those governing Connecticut at that time. Without an official apology by those in charge today, the sorrow and pain experienced by the accused will continue to reverberate through the succeeding generations of family and other people who seek justice.
Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Catherine Carmen, who is a Windsor resident and student.
Three letters. We are 3 letters away from justice, from peace, from making a new ending. By our representatives voting yes to the resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions in colonial Connecticut, the state will be ending the people's wait for justice. When I first spoke, I mentioned how I'm viewing this case as a women's rights issue, how they were not taken seriously. I spoke on the first day of Women's History Month, and I'm speaking again on the 8th, International Women's Day. I'm urging you to celebrate this day with me by supporting the exoneration of the mostly women and some men wrongfully accused and killed for witchcraft. I'm urging the display of respect to women today, fighting for what they believe in by acknowledging those who were wronged for so long. The path for those speaking to you was laid by the hundreds of generations of women who suffered from mistreatment, from misogyny. I owe Alice Young a thank you. I owe Lydia Gilbert a thank you. The best thank you I can give to them is fighting for their official exoneration, and the best our state can do is voting yes. We are asking our leaders. They are respected, educated people. They are smart, and they are taking what I'm saying into account. As state representatives, I'm asking them to represent the respect and courage Connecticut is full of. By coming forward and righting wrongs, these people will be doing just that. Children learning about the history of witchcraft in America will not be learning about how Connecticut failed to fix mistakes. They will be learning about how its lawmakers were brave enough to come forward centuries later and recognize past faults. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And now we're going to hear from Beth Caruso, president and co-founder of Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project and author.
Happy International Women's Day, everyone. I'm Beth Caruso. I support HJ Resolution 34. At the heart of this proposed resolution are descendants of both perpetrators and victims who want justice for people accused of the made-up crime of signing a pact with the devil based solely on superstition. Their requests and ours are for a simple exoneration. In 2016, Tony Grigo and I started CT Witch Memorial, a Facebook page devoted to telling the stories of Connecticut's witch trial victims. Over time, hundreds of descendants found our site. They come from all walks of life and all political parties. Descendants feel a strong connection to their ancestors and gratitude because without their ancestors, they wouldn't exist. When an ancestor has been treated unjustly without due process, a descendant feels pain and sorrow. Conversely, many descendants of perpetrators feel remorse for what their ancestor did and also want justice. None of this is surprising since there is a strong DNA connection. It is very human for witch trial descendants to feel powerful emotions about the brutal murders, malignment, and mistreatment of their family members. For descendants and others, this exoneration is a way to recognize grave wrongs, restore reputations, and help descendants' families be at peace. Because the victims of the witch trials were criminalized as a result of superstition, misogyny, and scapegoating, it's time for our modern legislature to correct the historical record to one of accuracy about what actually happened. In doing so, they also continue the legacy of one of Connecticut's most respected governors, John Winthrop Jr., who knew the trials were wrong in that same era. Thank you for your time and attention.
So thank you everyone for being here today, and for all of you, this is your bill that they have worked on for so long. And I just want to say, because the most asked question I get is, it wasn't the state of Connecticut. No, it was the Commonwealth. As the state of Connecticut, what we are saying is that we are sorry this happened to you. I'm very excited to get to be part of this process as our state makes strides towards justice and fairness by exonerating the women and men who are falsely accused of witchcraft and subsequently tortured and executed in the Commonwealth, which is now the state of Connecticut. In 2017, my town of Windsor exonerated the first witch executed in Connecticut. It is about time that these women are formally exonerated by the entire state. It should go without saying that these women were victims of egregious injustice, put to death after being convicted in illegal trials based on utterly ridiculous and insufficient evidence. These were not men witches, as others have mentioned before. They were people like you and me. Women were executed for electing to wear certain clothes, deviating from societal norms. They were executed because they might inherit property or because a certain person did not like them. It only took one person to make the accusation for this to move forward. This is not about witchcraft. This is about women's rights and justice. We need to make it abundantly clear that the state of Connecticut condemns the injustice, cruelty, and misogyny of these trials and executions. This resolution does not detract from any other important issues that the legislature is dealing with in this session. Instead, this resolution complements our work here in the General Assembly by taking another step towards the justice that this government is constantly working towards. Far from frivolous, this resolution is part and parcel of realizing the equality and fairness that we legislators work to achieve each and every day. Symbolic gestures do have real impact. This is a simple and compassionate way of expressing the state's remorse for this dark period in our history. And many people ask, well, why now? It happened 350 years ago. The real question to me is, why hasn't it happened sooner? It's like unbelievable. While these executions occurred a long time ago, the fight against misogyny that lied at the core of these murders is far from over. What happened to those 9 women and 2 men could happen again today in a world in which injustice and terror take so many different forms. We must learn from our history. That's what it's there for, so that we do not make the same mistakes of years ago. Let us recognize this injustice in our past so that we might strive towards justice in our future, become better people, and give justice to the descendants. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No? And I thank my co-sponsor in this, Dr. Anwar, who had to step out, and to all these wonderful people and my fellow representatives and everyone for being here, and all of you. Thank you.